Chapter 2. I adored Jane Eyre, the person and the book. In that book, it was as if I were reading a mirror. I read about Jane Eyre's aunt, the tyrannical Mrs. Reed, who I had no doubt was much like my Aunt Lavinia. More than that, I revered the narration for its wisdom, ardent emotions, and beyond all else, the heroine's fierce independence. How Jane suffered, how cruelly she was treated, how much she overcame, how splendid were her impulsive emotions, her bravery, her courage, wisdom, her great love. Oh, how I yearned to live just such a life full of trial, rebellion, and adventure. Only much later would I learn that the book was a work of fiction. When I first encountered it, I truly believed it to be the memoir of a real person, and was thus enthralled the more. Since then, I have come to regard fiction as fact without dates. Most important, it was in Jane Eyre, chapter 23, that I found this extraordinary sentence: "Your will shall decide your destiny." Those words became my guiding light, my ideal. Oh, how I wished my will could decide my destiny! The more books I read, the more convinced I became that I must become up to date in all my thoughts and live a life of independent and heightened sentiments. I began to appreciate that the smartest thing I could do was to acknowledge how ignorant I was. I saw old Providence as far too passive, with nothing spirited or fresh. I yearned to be free of Aunt Lavinia's rules. How grand, I thought, to be caught up in mystery, strong feelings, and adventure like Jane Eyre, to live a life written with exclamation points. Increasingly resistant to my aunt's opinions and rules, I came to think of her not merely as a controlling force, but as a bully. When I turned 13, I looked up the word teen, and was much pleased to discover the early meaning of the term was angry, vexed, and enraged. Thus, being as it were licensed by my dictionary, I chose to become fully teen, which to me meant that I had to move beyond Sheldon Street. How can I best express this? Since Rhode Island is a sea-going place, the state's symbol is an anchor. However, in Latin, an anchor, ancora, is a symbol of hope. Thus, the state's motto is hope. Observe the jest. An anchor is something that keeps you in place, whereas ancora, or hope, suggests change. As you can see, I began to desire not Rhode Island's anchor, which held me in place, but Rhode Island's ancora, which meant hope. My desire was to be free of Aunt Lavinia's directives. I began modestly. One day I informed my brother that I was going to walk downtown to the arcade to buy a ribbon. "Alone?" he said. "Across the river?" I said alone, across the river. "Without a chaperone?" "Without a chaperone." "What," he said, "would Aunt Lavinia say?" Jacob's words stiffened my resolve. I said, "I don't care what she says, but you mustn't tell." As I left the house, I could hear Jacob whistling. I walked down the hill, then across the Providence River to the city center, a distance of more than a mile. I had never walked alone so far from home. Despite my resolution and my desire for rebellion, I was quite nervous and walked with care, acutely aware that I was an unchaperoned girl, rare for someone of my station. Also, everyone was a stranger, and those strangers mostly men. Feeling that every male eye was upon me, and those eyes malevolent, I kept my gloved hands clasped and my eyes straight forward, pretending not to notice anyone. I managed to find a shop, quickly purchased a yard of blue ribbon, and went straight back home, altogether thankful when I reached it. Upon my return, such was Jacob's relief that he hugged me. "You were gone so long I almost went to save you," he confessed. I did not tell him of my own unease or my sense of triumph. Yes, that dictionary of mine told me there were many synonyms for freedom, liberty, self-determination, autonomy. But as far as I was concerned, the most exciting meaning was boldness. Perhaps the best illustration of my life at that time was my weekly dancing lessons. As I have set down, Aunt Lavinia had insisted I attend lessons at Mrs. Coldbreadt's Academy of Dancery. There I was expected to learn to dance while absorbing proper social etiquette, which is to say, how to conduct my social life. The classes were instructed by a Mrs. Colbrett, who always reminded me of a giraffe. I had seen a picture of one in a book, in a long black dress. She used an ebony cane to beat the time while crooked-backed speechless Mr. Colbrett plucked the piano keys. The quadrille, the grand march, and the waltz were taught. The polka, of which I had only heard, was considered unrefined and not taught. Though young, we girls were always dressed in good fashion. White gloves for all, high-necked, long muslin dresses of check design with 3-tiered sleeves. Boys came in cutaway jackets, black cravats, and narrow trousers. Some even wore top hats. Of course, we had dance cards which listed by number one's partner for each dance. They were filled out by Mrs. Colbrett, who was most careful to make proper matches. Note: I was told to bring those cards home so that Aunt Lavinia might inspect and evaluate my dance partners. The byword at the dancing school was serenity, with no displays of emotion. I can well recall Mrs. Colbrett reminding us that attention should be particularly paid to giving the hands in a proper manner, to the avoiding of affectation in doing so, to keeping the united hands at a height suited to both parties, shunning the slightest grasping or weighing upon the hands of another, to avoid twisting your partner. The lessons were followed by a formal tea, during which we were required to make polite conversation. Needless to say, we girls were never to initiate a conversation. Mrs. Colbrett had directives about conversations, too, such as, "Don't talk in a high shrill voice, and avoid nasal tones. Cultivate a chest voice, learn to moderate your tones. Talk always in a low register, but not too low. Avoid any air of mystery when speaking to those next to you. It is ill-bred and in excessively bad taste." Aunt Lavinia thoroughly approved of such ideas. For my part, I desired nothing more than to acquire that air of mystery. One day in the winter of 1848 I was attending my dance lesson. Having danced, it was tea time with delicate china cups, and we girls and boys were chatting in the required way. "Miss Victoria, how pleasant to see you. How are you this day?" This was asked of me by a snub-nosed, big-eared 12-year-old boy named Archibald Ackroyd, who was a head shorter than me. "Most fine, sir, thank you." "Have you had an agreeable week?" "Most certainly, and may I inquire about you, Master Ackroyd?" Though I spoke so, I was feeling most disconnected, bored, barely listening to the mindless chatter of the children around me. I suspect my indifference was because the night before I had been reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, wherein are such passages as, "To me the walls of a dungeon or a palace were alike hateful. The cup of life was poisoned for ever, and although the sun shone upon me as upon the happy and gay of heart, I saw around me nothing but a dense and frightful darkness." You can understand, then, how struck I was by the nothingness of the youth surrounding me, how thoroughly empty of vigorous ideas, how void of real emotions, how complacent, how potato-headed these suitable children all were. That evening, with great indignation, I shared such thoughts with Jacob. To my frustration, my brother was puzzled by my reaction to that dance lesson. Of course, he had not read Frankenstein. In truth, if I had told him it had been written by a 19-year-old girl, he would have been horrified, not so much by the monster, but by the girl. "You had better," he warned, "not tell Aunt Lavinia what you read." I informed Mother I would not go to dancing classes again. Among my grievances, "Why must I always do and think as your sister says? She is wealthy, older, and wiser." I replied, "She opposed your marriage to Father." Mother assured me that her marriage had been a love match. Then she smiled, patted my hand, and said, "All too soon you will grow up, and then you will understand the ways of a girl in the world. Be patient, Tori." As far as I was concerned, patience was merely the pretense of good-mannered waiting, another anchor, when in fact one is actually in a hurry. More and more I wanted a change. Alas, I had come to realize that the more contented a family appears, the more often the parents fail to notice when the eldest child changes. But as it happened, I did not have to wait long for enormous shifts to happen. That was because something unforeseen occurred, something that transformed our placid lives. Father lost his position and all his wages.